Welcome. We are but 30 minutes away from the delivery of the midterm budget policy statement by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Of course, people are highly anticipating this. They want to hear from him in terms of what ideas does he have around charging economic growth? What ideas does he have around making the cost of living that much more manageable and so on? So there's a lot that is at stake. And of course, he's going to give us a picture on how we're doing around debt. He's going to give us the fiscal framework around what we can expect from the 2026 budget that he'll deliver hopefully in February. I say hopefully, of course, because this year was such a very complicated year where the final budget was only delivered in May 2025. This after they had to withdraw, that is National Treasury had to withdraw its decision to put up VAT by 2 percentage points. All right, so to get into conversation now, I'm joined by Dominic Brown. He's from the People Opposing Budget Cuts, and also Huda Faker. She's the Black Sash, the National Advocacy Manager there. Thank you so much for joining us. Dominic, maybe I can start with you. As your title suggests, you're against budget cuts, you're obviously against austerity, and that has been a criticism of this government or National Treasury for the last number of years. What are you hoping that the Finance Minister will be saying at the midterm that speaks to your concerns?
Well, we should see a massive level of increased spending to public services, education and healthcare. This doesn't just mean a small real percentage increase. There's been more than a decade of underfunding. There's 112,000 vacancies in the public sector. This needs a massive increase in the level of expenditure to be able to deal with the social crisis and the unemployment crisis in the country.
Huda, perhaps I can just pose the exact same question to you.
Sure, it's important that social spending be increased. Although there is social spending, it is not meaningful. The lived reality is that people are struggling on the ground. We're specifically hoping that the social relief of distress grant will become permanent because there's huge unemployment. And despite the fact that we want it to be complemented by job creation, it's not happening. The investment programs they have with the expanded public works program is very limited and not sustainable. So it doesn't actually have a huge impact.
So Dominic, when Faker says that we need to have a situation where SRD becomes more permanent. But of course, the government needs to juggle everything. On the one hand, we have debt where we're paying about 22% of revenue on paying back just the actual debt service costs each year, which runs into billions, about, just over 400 billion rand a year, which is over R1 billion per day. For Treasury to pay back to the market money that we've borrowed for these initiatives. How do we get that balance right? Because obviously it doesn't help if we're highly indebted as well.
The question is, what's an effective public debt management strategy? So when you don't invest sufficiently in the economy, when you narrow the inflation target and push for increased interest rates, this throttles the economy and reduces prospects for development. Now, when you develop, you increase the size of GDP, and when you increase the size of GDP, that results in a declining debt to GDP ratio over time. So the problem is not so much that we are in a debt crisis, the problem is that we're using ineffective public debt management strategies.
Right. Okay, we're going to leave it for now, Dominic and Faker. Thank you so much for that. Let me hand it over now to Abra, who's in conversation with some politicians.
And I'm continuing with asking political parties for their views and expectations of the minister's speech at 2 o'clock today. First of all, I'll be doing Brett Hayden of the Good Party. Brett, thank you so much for speaking to us today. What is it that Good is hoping to hear the minister say when he tables his speech at 2 o'clock?
So we don't expect that the minister will table or present economic data that has changed much since the budget speech in terms of economic growth projections. But we do need to hear from the minister around the government's new economic growth strategy, which is called GAIN, which has been widely publicized but not properly announced, the growth and inclusion strategy. And surely in this medium-term budget policy statement, we should be able to see how that economic growth strategy will influence future economic growth in our country and create employment. Then most importantly, as we always remind our government, the social relief of distress grant. There have been lots of promises around work on that social relief of distress grant to convert it into a basic income grant. And we would like to hear from the Minister of Finance that work has progressed and when we can expect to hear that South Africa will have a basic income grant. And right now we have a crisis of food insecurity or hunger in our country, and we would like to hear from the Minister that will be addressed through a national food program.
Great, thank you so much for your time. I have Daisman Zanzi Songezo Zibi up next. Scopa chairperson, you deal with all things financial at Parliament when it comes to keeping entities to account. What exactly is it that you would like to hear the Minister account on today when he presents the midterm budget speech?
Look, the issue that we had raised as early as last year, but particularly sharply this year, is the issue of the efficiency of government expenditure. Because government has too many programs, they overlap, they're not exactly measured in the way that we should measure whether they are working or not. I'll give you an example. The amount of money that is spent in the SETA space per trainee is the same or more than you spend per person at university level, for instance. We need to look at why that is and whether that system cannot be reformed such that you are able to make every rand go as far as possible. That is one example. The second thing, though, that is really important is that inflation is back under control at the moment. As you know, South Africa has a cost of living crisis. People actually can't afford rapid price increases. That is going to have an impact, and we'll see the numbers today on our debt servicing costs, because South Africa spends over 420 billion a year paying interest on debt. That number needs to come down so that we can take some of that money and direct it to other priorities within social spending.
Thank you so much for your time. We'll catch up with you after the speech. The Patriotic Alliance's Jasmine Peterson is also going to share her party's views. Let's get into it. What do you want to hear the Minister say at 2 o'clock?
Thank you so much, Ibra. I think it's important that we start by acknowledging that South Africa has a crisis of unemployment, especially for young people. But we are now dealing with a more urgent expectation, and that is a budget that protects women and children in the country. The statistics are shocking, and how can I say? The statistics are shocking, and we cannot continue to treat GBVF in this country as a side issue. So what the expectations would be is that this budget shows in real terms how government plans to protect women and children, and how the relevant departments will work together to deliver results sooner rather than later.
Ms. Peterson, thank you so much. We'll speak to you afterwards. Now it's Aljama's Imran Musa. Sir, thank you for your time. I'm just shifting over here. Just quickly, what do you want to hear the Minister say?
So from Aljama's perspective, my name is Imran Musa. I'm the leader of Parliament here in the House. Yes. So basically, from Aljama's perspective, we want to see solutions. We're solution driven, and we commend the President for having the retreat recently. And that retreat recently has come up with some good solutions, and they've agreed that 62% of the budget should be allocated to combat poverty. I also feel that amongst the corporates and businesses to ensure that we have employment and food sustainability, and the way to create solutions and possibilities for our residents is that these corporates should engage in partnerships with government so that we can be successful, because we can't leave government itself to do everything. It's impossible, and I think globally we know that no budget will be sufficient for any country.
Thank you so much. We'll speak to you after the speech.
Thank you.
I think that is a wrap from us here in terms of asking parties for their expectations, and of course we will catch up with you after once the Minister's delivered his speech. Studio.
Thanks very much. Well, what's interesting is that depending on the prism through which you look at things, certain policies are good for the capital markets, but they're not so good for your ordinary folk on the ground. Inflation targeting is something that's been very topical. The Reserve Bank Governor Lisicha Kganyago has indicated that the Reserve Bank is now going to be looking at the lower end of the target range, that is 3 to 6%. So that is they're going to be looking at rather 3%. That's where their focus is. And we're waiting to hear whether the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is going to confirm that indeed he is giving approval of that, and he's going to be setting a lower inflation target. Some people have suggested he must go for 2 to 4%, because that way the midpoint will be 3%, and that gives the Reserve Bank some leeway when inflation does spike due to external shocks or whatever. But the reason I started off by saying is that some policies are good for some and not for others is that I have someone with me here who is not really that in favor of a lower inflation target. I'm in conversation again with Dominic Brown. He's from the people opposing budget cuts. Dominic, so tell me, economists and so on, they say it will be very important for us to have lower inflation, because if everyone anchors their inflation expectations lower, it means that the erosion of our local currency will be less and will have more value in our pockets. So why are you against it?
So in the first instance, it's important to say that the main drivers of inflation in our country is not too much money chasing too few goods. We don't have a problem of demand. In fact, there's declining levels of local demand in this country. But mainly the main way to deal or keep inflation as the way it has been is through increasing interest rates. And when we see the increasing interest rates, of which South Africa has amongst the highest level of interest rates in the world, we'll probably see the persistence of this with the narrowing of the inflation target. So what does a higher interest rate mean? Well, it means higher borrowing costs, higher debt service costs for most households who are already highly indebted. By having to pay more for household debts, we see less disposable income, which means a further decline in demand. Secondly, when we see high interest rates, it disincentivizes investment into the economy where jobs can be created, particularly in manufacturing, for example, where you have higher borrowing costs. So if we see high interest rates, we'll probably see effectively a continued choking of the economy due to lower levels of buying power and a lack of incentives for investing in them.
It's not my first time to hear these arguments, and they're solid arguments, but the Reserve Bank Governor will say short-term pain for long-term gain. In other words, in the longer run, if we do have longer-term inflation at a lower level, that's going to be beneficial in the long run.
Since the 2000s, South Africa has had very low levels of inflation actually behind certain periods. And so at the same period, we haven't seen massive levels of growth. Moreover, we hear from economists from the World Bank, for instance, who even indicate that the narrow target is, or how low the target is highly exaggerated. We've seen, and I'm not advocating for high levels of inflation, but we've even seen high levels of economic growth and development when inflation has been between 15 and 20%. And then I suppose you have to ask, what are the drivers of inflation? Is it, as I was saying, too much money chasing too few goods, or is it external factors? So is it due to increasing price in fuel costs? Is it due to changes in the way global trade is being organized, resulting in trade bottlenecks? All of these things can't be resolved through increasing the interest rate. So then you need to think what policy measures can help to deal with inflation, especially for low-income households. And here you have other more effective policy instruments. So, for example, you can cap the level of prices of certain goods within the market, price controls, particularly goods that are essential for people to live, right? And they will say there are zero-rated items, but we've seen that this hasn't really helped to curb the prices of these goods in society. So what it boils down to is, number one, the narrow inflation target is not a means of creating development. Instead, it will help to continue to contract the economy. And secondly, the interest rate is not a good instrument to be able to deal with inflation when it occurs.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying, Dominic, it makes a lot of sense. But of course, there's the counter argument. And we know that, of course, inflation is a tricky one because, I mean, even if you look at the largest economy in the world, the United States, they've been grappling with keeping inflation down since after the increase in inflation after COVID. I mean, their inflation target is actually 2%, but their inflation level is around 2.7%. But despite that, they're still cutting interest rates because they're worried about the pressure higher interest rates are having on corporates and, households. So it's a tricky one. It's not an exact science. Dominic, thank you so much for your time. That was Dominic Brown. He's from the people opposing budget cuts.
Well, welcome again. We are outside the Good Hope Chamber. Of course, we're seeing a lot of ministers trickling into the chamber. All of them are coming from a cabinet meeting. We want to check whether the government of national unity is still holding, given what we saw earlier this year, where there was a budget impasse around the issue of the VAT increase, which was later abandoned. I'm going to bring in now one of the partners in the government of national unity, Chief Whip of the UDM, Ngabayomzi Kwangwa. Good afternoon, sir, and thank you so much for making time. Firstly, let's start here. Do you expect that the government of national unity will find peace and collegiality in terms of supporting this mid-term budget?
Well, that's difficult to say because I'm not the spokesperson of the government of national unity. I'm hoping whatever differences might exist between the different parties within that GNU arrangement, we'll be able to discuss those amicably and find solutions to them. But what we expect is the UDM from here is issues around how when we went to the main budget, there were many issues around growth forecast, there were many issues around unemployment, how to reignite economic growth in South Africa. And there didn't seem to be consensus at the time. I do believe that the minister here will actually be giving a statement of intent as to how to collaborate all the proposals from the different partners from the government of national unity into one growth strategy for the country. I haven't had any dissenting noise insofar as the proposal that is going to table today. I think what will have to happen is that beyond him tabling this budget is that we need to see how we're going to put the nuts and bolts together towards implementing the program that is going to propose today.
Over the years, the ministers have been lamenting around the issue of the government spending review in terms of trimming the fat to ensure that you fund the most critical areas of government. Do you think he's going to make any announcements that will take us at least a little bit forward rather than telling us the same old story?
No, we can't fiscally consolidate ourselves into oblivion. I mean, we have embarked on this fiscal consolidation strategy for years. Now it's about time that whatever savings we've realized over the years are utilized towards making sure that we reignite growth in South Africa, but we also make targeted spending that is going to help us to address some of the socio-economic challenges facing the country. I think that is key for us insofar as this medium-term budget policy statement is concerned.
All right, thank you so much. Ngabayomzi Kwangwa, the UDM Chief Whip. Let me turn to my left now, Fadil Adams, the leader of the National Coloured Congress. Your expectation as the NCC?
Well, we've heard midterm budgets before. We're not expecting anyone to tear up any trees today. For us, it's all about deliverables. It's about where's the value in this, and let's hope the president surprises us. But I don't think so.
Will the partners in the GNU find each other on this budget so that we don't see what we saw earlier in the year?
Oh, you know how it works with mixed race marriages. You never know. These people are power hungry, man. They're power drunk. People will compromise their principles and vote against things that they don't believe, vote for things they don't believe for, just for those blue lights and those extra perks. We're more concerned about service delivery, and ultimately we'd like to see the minister today announce that we're going to start penalizing departments that aren't delivering, like SABC, for example. Where top-level policemen are buying hotels and Lamborghinis with our tax monies, and you know what? They want increases in their budgets. We're hoping that the minister says, no, you make do with less, we're offering you less to steal. That's where we're hoping we'll go.
But they're arguing that they don't have enough resources to fight organized crime.
There's more than enough resources to fight organized crime if the top generals in the country only stop stealing.
Do you have proof of that?
Yes, I do. I've delivered it to SABC. And when I come to the ad hoc committee, I'll bring some more.
All right, thank you so much, Fadil Adams, the president of the National Coloured Congress. We're going to leave it at that as we go inside the chamber where the Finance Minister will be delivering the 2025 medium-term budget policy statement. It's back to you.
Oh, yes, I am. The chamber, the good chamber in Parliament, and of course we are awaiting the Finance Minister to deliver his speech at exactly 2 o'clock sharp. He'll be giving us a medium-term view of what the expectations are for economic growth, inflation, what the National Treasury's revenue and spending plans are. At the last budget delivery in May, he did indicate that come February they may be looking to raise about 20 billion rand in tax revenue, but that would be dependent on how well SARS does in terms of being able to extract more money from the taxpayer in terms of the debts that are already owed to it. And of course it was given a lot of resources, or it is going to be given a lot of resources over the medium term, some 7.5 billion rand extra in order to be able to achieve that goal. They're using things like, they're using stuff like technology, AI, in order to be able to better assess who owes tax and getting that tax. Joining me right now is Thokozile Madonko. She's a researcher at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University. And of course, from her title, you can tell she's very much interested in the issue of inequality and addressing it. For too long now, civil society has been complaining that National Treasury and the government has generally been very lackadaisy in addressing social issues. There's still too much poverty. There's still a situation where people don't have access to the basics and so on and so forth. Thokozile, thank you very much for joining us. We know that there are a lot of issues that concern you around inequality, but let's talk about the basics, like for example, municipal delivery. We know that has been really very bad indeed, and they're trying to find strategies. We now have Operation Vulindlela, the second phase, which is now looking to address that directly. What do you think needs to be done? Because they're at the coalface of delivery, and if they don't deliver, communities can't thrive, businesses can't thrive.
Absolutely, and what's critical about looking at local government broadly is that we need to rethink our financing of local government. At the moment, the fiscal framework and assumptions behind local government financing is that it will be balanced by utilities, so being able to raise their own revenues. And we know that for the vast majority of our municipalities across the country, they're not in a position to raise revenues because the households that they service are not in a position to pay those rates. So one of the things that is very exciting is that there is an acknowledgement that there needs to be a relook and a rethink about how we finance local government. And it's exciting that the Operation Vulindlela is looking into this in more detail, particularly around infrastructure. But we also have to look at how the central, sort of the national government funds local government as well. So the division of revenue becomes very important. At the moment it's been very low, and there's been little real investment in infrastructure, and that's why we're seeing the breakdown of water services and so forth. So in order to tackle this, we need to see a greater stimulus into local government, and particularly thinking from a green perspective or a climate lens perspective, to make our municipalities not only function really well for people, but to function well for the planet as well. And it's interesting because those kinds of arrangements, public transport, bulk infrastructure, investing in roads and so forth, has huge multiplier effects in the economy, and it gets people employed, gets people working, gets people getting wages, increases our revenue through taxation, and so it's a virtuous cycle. At the moment, we're not really seeing that playing out in terms of the policy direction of National Treasury, which has been quite a constrictive policy.
Are you concerned about the inflation target? We were having the conversation just now with Dominic Brown, who was saying that, it's going to lead to a situation where interest rates might be higher because we're aiming for an inflation target that might be ambitious, and then the Reserve Bank is under pressure by raising rates because we're not meeting that 3%, which we happen to have achieved lately, even lower than that. But that's been more due to sort of global factors.
Absolutely, and it's a political choice. There's the inflation targeting and targeting at the supposed 3%. There isn't any real economics behind it other than benefiting creditors. So it ensures interest rates for creditors who then get a return on their investment. It doesn't really tackle where it hits for most South Africans, which is the cost of their food basket. And so it seems very, very, very seductive to hear the language around that this will help poor households. But inflation doesn't affect everybody equally. So a disproportionate of the households spend a disproportionate amount of their money on food, not on cars, on bonds and mortgages and so forth. They spend it on food, and they're not likely to see this inflation targeting is not likely to affect the cost of the food basket very much. The second area that it's important for us to understand the kind of maths that's not mathing when it comes to talking about the inflation target and why we can tolerate a certain amount of inflation is that you want to see wages, a fair wage agreement across the board, public and private. And we see that in a low inflationary environment, you suppress wages because you don't have to increase them very high. So again, middle class to low income households are hit even harder because they're not even paid above inflation wages, which are now low, but their cost of living doesn't really get impacted because there are, like you say, other factors that influence the food basket, namely our highly concentrated food industries, what happens globally in the global economy, and so forth.
Thokozile, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. That was Thokozile Madongo. She's a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University, giving us her take on how the government or National Treasury should go about addressing some of the very pressing issues that we face in the country. And of course, we do have very high unemployment. We have very desperately high levels of poverty, and those need to be addressed because a fairer society is best for everyone. You avoid things like high crime rates and everybody gets a fair share and access to the economy, and everybody is able to contribute to that economy as well. We're going to have to wait to see what the Finance Minister has to say around the issue of growth and really ensuring that everybody is a beneficiary of that growth, what the ANC government in the past has termed inclusive growth, and what the GNU now talks about in terms of inclusive growth. All right, so we are just a few minutes away. We are 1 minute away from 2 o'clock. I don't have any suspicion that the Finance Minister won't be tabling the midterm budget. It will probably be in the next few minutes. He's scheduled to deliver that message right now. So there's a lot, of course, that we're expecting him to speak to. As I mentioned before, he will be talking about what the expectations around economic growth. 2025 has been a crazy year, of course, with the presidency of Mr. Donald Trump in the United States. His policies have really created a situation where nations around the world are having to look at new markets with the higher tariffs and so on. And South Africa has not been spared as we now have a 30% tariff increase that we need to be concerned about. Let me continue with Thokozile as the Minister has not begun to speak. Thokozile, I mentioned the issue of the Okay, Thokozile, we're going to leave it. This is live television. We're going to hand it back over now to the Finance Minister who's speaking in Parliament.
Order. Honorable members, can you please be seated? Find your seats. Thank you. Honorable members, before we proceed with our business, I wish to announce that the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly owing to the resignation of Dr. S.M. Jomo has been filled by nomination of Ms. D.R. Ntuli with effect from 7 November 2025. The member has made and subscribed to the oath in the office of the Speaker. I want to welcome the honorable member, and if she can please stand. Thank you very much. You are most welcome. I will now ask the Secretary to read the first to the third orders together.
Medium-term budget policy statement. Introduction, Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Introduction, Taxation Laws Amendment Bill.
I now recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance.
Medium-term budget policy statement. Introduction, adjustment.
Order, honorable members. Honorable members, we are here to receive from the Minister of Finance the tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement and the introduction of the Adjustment Appropriation Bill and the introduction of the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill. Once again, may I ask members to take their seats, and just to indicate that we are attending to the issue of the air conditioning. I can see that it's not the private sun that members may be having, some of you. Yes, Mr. President, there is a private sun for some of us, but it's not that, it's just the heat. That's why even our gentlemen are going on. So, Honorable Member, Minister, you can table your medium-term budget policy statement.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Togo Didiza, Deputy Speaker, Aneli Lord-Triet, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Refilo Mtsweni Tsipane, Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Province, Les Govenda, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency, the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, honorable members, members of the Executive Council for Finance in Provinces, Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Lesesha Kganyago, Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Edward Kisvete, Chairperson of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, Patience Mbava, fellow South Africans. We convene at a time when South Africa, like many nations around the world, is grappling with intensifying global competition and mounting economic and political divisions. It is against this fractured landscape that South Africa has been falsely accused of genocide against its white community and threatened with punitive sanctions based on falsehood. Let me thank the many communities here at home and around the world that have rejected the false narrative and the fear, hate, and disinformation they represent, and instead chosen to defend the principles of solidarity and equality. The members of the African community who recently came out publicly refusing to be used as a pawn or portrayed as victims provide us with a timely reminder of our responsibility to forge collective prosperity grounded in truth, justice, and mutual respect. They made the call not in our name. And that, to me, was an important patriotic call. Madam Speaker, it is in this spirit that I tabled the following documents before this House. The Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, Adjustment Appropriation Bill, Taxation Laws Amendment Bill, Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, and this medium budget policy statement. As we table this policy statement, we have reason to be optimistic about the future of our country. Our optimism is rooted in the progress we've made in keeping the promises we have set out. A promise to grow the economy faster, to strengthen public finances, and to improve life for all South Africans. 2 years ago, we committed to stabilizing public debt in the current year and then begin to reduce it. Despite a challenging environment of persistently low economic growth, we are on track to achieving this goal. We also committed to remove South Africa from the Financial Action Task Force grey list. We have delivered on this commitment in just 2.5 years. This is thanks to collaboration across government departments, law enforcement agencies, and the private sector. Exiting grey listing enhances South Africa's attractiveness to investors and make it easier to do business with us. However, we cannot afford to be complacent. FATF's next mutual evaluation of South Africa begins in the first half of 2026. We must continue to tackle money laundering and terrorism financing to stay off the grey list. Honourable members, we also promise to use our presidency of the first African G20 to firmly place Africa on the global agenda. As we approach the final stretch of our presidency, we have successfully concluded meetings of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors, brokering critical consensus for the continent's development. We are ready for the Leaders' Summit in Johannesburg just over a week's time. Despite all of this progress, we must remain realistic about the present and the action it demands. South Africa's most pressing challenge remains accelerated economic growth to create jobs and reduce poverty at the scale required. Drawing lessons from the 2025 budget process, we have engaged extensively to build consensus on how to achieve faster growth and leverage public finances to attract investment needed to create jobs and improve life for all. Allow me to turn to the economic outlook. Madam Speaker, South Africa's economic prospects are shaped not only by domestic factors, but by also global developments. Global growth is estimated to slow slightly to 3.2% in 2025. Amid ongoing trade tensions, geopolitical uncertainty, and supply chain disruptions, while the shocks of the unilateral tariffs imposed by the United States have not materialized severely as expected, their delayed effects, coupled with the rising protectionism, pose future risks to global productivity and price stability. Global equity markets have surged, driven by AI-related stocks and central bank rate cuts. But this rally carries the risk of sudden reversals. Given this uncertainty, it is critical that we leverage the immense opportunities presented by the Sub-Sahara region. We continue to make progress in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to strengthen multilateralism and regional cooperation.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, Father. Thank you.
Order, Honorable Nanda.
Domestically, we forecast real GDP growth at 1.2% for 2025, more than double the economic growth in 2024. We now forecast real GDP growth will average 1.8% between 2026 and 2028. Madam Speaker, the structural reforms we have embarked on, particularly in the energy and logistics, will be key to lifting our rate of growth closer to levels demanded by our developmental needs. Our strategy for faster growth and healthier finances continues to be anchored on 4 pillars. The first is maintaining macroeconomic stability. The second is implementing structural reforms. The third is building state capability. And the fourth, supporting growth-enhancing infrastructure. Madam Speaker, faster economic growth requires effective macroeconomic management. Over the past year, National Treasury and the Reserve Bank have jointly assessed the impact of a lower target on our economy and the fiscal framework. This work has now been concluded and recommends a revision to the target to strengthen the framework and enhance price stability by better anchoring inflation expectations and aligning South Africa to international best practice. Today, I announce a new inflation target for South Africa of 3% with a 1% point tolerance band. This decision follows agreement between the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank and my consultation with the President and Cabinet. The 1 percentage point band provides flexibility to accommodate unexpected inflationary shocks. This new target immediately replaces the previous target range between 3% and 6% and will be implemented over the next 2 years. Over time, the lower target will decrease inflation expectations and creating room for lower interest rates. This supports household spending and business investment, boosting economic growth and job creation. The short-term fiscal cost of lower target, which include nominal GDP and revenue growth, will make achieving fiscal targets more challenging. Yet, the long-term benefits of taking this step far outweigh this cost. We remain committed to ensuring that our macroeconomic policies serve the best interests of all South Africans. Madam Speaker, our fiscal strategy aims to achieve the following goals. Anchor fiscal policy by stabilizing debt and growing the primary budget surplus. Mobilize and direct more resources towards infrastructure investment and improving efficiency and effectiveness of spending. I'm pleased to inform the House and the country that we are on track to restore fiscal sustainability. Government debt will stabilize in 25-26 at 77.9% of GDP. This is the first time since 2008 financial crisis that public debt will not grow as a percentage of GDP. Since 2008, spending has consistently exceeded revenue, driving up debt and debt service costs. These costs crowded out spending on critical services and exerted pressure on lending rates across the economy. But we are now turning this around. This year, revenues will exceed the budget estimates by 19.3 billion. Meanwhile, debt service costs will be lower by 4.8 billion. Over the MTF, debt service costs will grow by 3.87% annually. This is a significant reduction from the 7.4% growth anticipated at the time of the 2025 budget. We will also achieve a primary budget surplus of 68.5 billion, or 0.9% of the GDP this year. This will grow to 224 billion by 2028. Let me just explain this thing a bit. A primary surplus is quite critical Because in the absence of that primary surplus, you are not going to impact on the debt trajectory. The primary surplus help to change that debt structure in a downward spiral. What are the effects of that? Your debt service costs come down. Once your debt service costs come down, sir, revenue becomes available to fund our developmental goals. The overall budget deficits will now narrow from 4.5% of GDP in 2025-26 to 2.7 in 28-29. Madam Speaker, to further ensure long-term sustainability of public finances, the government is considering options for a form of fiscal anchor. We're exploring what we call a principle-led approach that provides for a clear parliamentary oversight, stronger reporting on fiscal risk, and transparency on distributional impacts. Earlier this year, we published a discussion paper on this topic, and consultation with stakeholders and experts are ongoing. The better than estimated tax revenue of 19.7 billion is due to stronger household expenditure, which has boosted value-added tax collection and improvements in corporate tax receipts and dividend taxes. Lower than expected VAT refunds also contributed to improved revenue outlook. As indicated in 2025 budget, an additional 4 billion was allocated to the South African Revenue Service. This allocation was intended in part to strengthen debt collection and thereby increase revenue collection by between 20 and 50 billion per year. We'll continue to monitor SARS revenue performance for the remainder of the year. This assessment will inform whether the 20 billion additional tax increases for 2026 budget, as earlier proposed, can be withdrawn. A final decision, let me just say, if it withdrawn, and the 20 billion is not achieved, there are two options open to us, is to then raise taxes or cut expenditure. There's no two ways. That's how this thing works. We must find revenue or cut expenditure. Honorable members, South Africa faces problems of illicit trade that threatens our economy, endangers consumers, and robs the fiscals of billions in revenue. The growing market for illicit cigarettes and alcohol poses serious risk to public health and undermine legitimate business. Each year, billions of rands in taxes go uncollected, funds that could have closed our revenue gap and avoided tax increases entirely. According to SARS, since 2020, government has lost around 40 billion in excise revenues to the cigarette black market. This same is true for illicit alcohol and fuel. Government is clamping down on this illegal trade, and in the last 6 months, SARS suspended 3 licenses for non-compliant tobacco production. The Financial Intelligence Center has provided intelligence report to SARS to assist in investigation of criminal syndicates. Together, they have identified illicit markets in tobacco, precious metals, fuel, and procurement fraud. Custom officials must fulfill their duty to prevent criminals from dodging taxes and flooding our markets with dangerous products. Of course, for them to achieve that, just if I may explain, they will have to need the full might of the law enforcement agencies behind them. That coordinated work is quite important. I'm pleased to inform this House that Cabinet has already taken a decision that coordinated work must take place. Madam Speaker, the adjustment in revenue means that we can make changes to our spending estimates. For the current year, additional expenditure of 15.8 billion rand is proposed amongst the in-year adjustment, and is also 2 billion rand for the building of Parliament and 1 billion rand for the Independent Electoral Commission for the 2026 municipal election. Let me explain a bit. Earlier on, if you were listening, I said this year we've got an over collection of about 19.3 billion rand. That's what I said earlier on. We realize that we may not have sufficient resources next year. What we have done is to say, what are the recurrent expenditures for next year, which we can fund this year? What this 15.8 billion does, it takes those recurrent expenditures for the following year while bringing them forward and funding them in this specific year. In addition, the spending announced in May budget for the national dialogue as well as its carry-through costs are catered for here. These allocations are on top of the additional funding provisions for education and health announced in the May budget. Madam Speaker, President Ramaphosa has consistently spoken of infrastructure as the flywheel of our economy. In line with this vision and advancing our pillar of growth enhancing infrastructure, we are shifting the composition of spending from consumption to investment. Capital payments are the fastest growing expenditure item at 7.5% over the medium term. We are leveraging public resources to mobilize private finance and expertise at scale to strengthen service delivery, improve spending effectiveness, and drive high economic growth. The amendments to the PPP regulations took effect from the 1st of June 2025, and these unlock potential across spheres of government and streamline approvals for smaller projects. 3 weeks ago, new guidelines on unsolicited bids and fiscal commitments and contingent liabilities were issued, and these took effect immediately. The unsolicited bid guidelines provides a clear structured pathway for the private sector to submit project ideas to government. The other guideline provides a framework for reporting and managing of fiscal commitments and contingent liabilities arising out of the PPP projects. Municipality PPP regulations will be amended by 2026. Leverage, and I'm still going to give you a report, President, because you said I must do it this year. It has been difficult to finish this year because of a number of regulations framework that accompanies that. Leveraging lessons from the renewable IPP projects to streamline planning and procurement, the Department of Transport Private Sector Participation Unit is reviving the passenger transport and logistics sector. Following strong interest from the freight logistic request for information, the unit will issue the first rail corridor request for proposal by December 2025, with others following in early 2026. The unit has also issued requests for information for investment opportunities in modernizing and growing the passenger rail system. Water Partnership Office is making progress in preparing non-revenue water and reuse projects across municipalities. I mean, this term non-revenue water is still, I can't understand it. I always, people, why do you say this is non-revenue water? It's water that is transported from, an example, from a water board to a municipalities, it gets lost on the process. And we call it non-revenue water, whereas it's wasted water. Okay. This will create robust pipeline for the private sector to co-invest, and we have reconfigured budget facility for infrastructure to run for 4 bid windows annually instead of just 1. Since the configuration, the budget facility for infrastructure has received 28 submissions. Out of those, 9 projects were accepted for detailed analysis. Funding for the tune of 4.1 billion is also allocated for disaster relief to fix schools, pipelines, clinics, and substation damage between the last year and this year flooding in KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, and Eastern Cape. To raise the funding for these BFI projects, A new infrastructure bond will be launched soon to raise a minimum of 15 billion. The bond forms part of our efforts to introduce dedicated financing instrument that can mobilize cheaper financing to support infrastructure agenda. Government will also contribute to 2 billion to capitalize the credit guarantee facility. If you don't understand clearly, please meet Dr. Ramokgopa. That's his pet project on the transmission line. Initially, the vehicle will support electricity transmission expansion, directly contribute to our efforts at new energy security while also driving decarbonization. Let me just pause again. What Dr. Ramokgopa says is that in provinces such as Northern Cape, where you have renewable projects, I'm going to use his term, we can't evacuate the electrons. So what does that mean is that we can't take the electricity out of Northern Cape because there are no transmission lines. And this is what the project is intended to do. This heralds a new era in triple Ps, where private investment in high voltage transmission lines is enabled. This is really progress in our movement away from merely fixing the power utility to securing power to the grid from a range of sources. This is a key and innovative part of infrastructure reforms developed with international partners to de-risk private investment without state guarantees. We're also committed to simplifying the institutional arrangements across the infrastructure ecosystem. The new Infrastructure Finance and Implementation Support Agency will be in place by March. The agency will provide project preparation support to supply the BFI pipeline. It will centralize infrastructure financing functions to systematically crowd in private capital and promote the use of alternative delivery mechanisms. Honourable members, this is how we will ensure that our goal of public sector investment in infrastructure exceeds the 1 trillion mark over the next 3 years. Madam Speaker, we estimate that tax collection will remain buoyant over the medium term. Despite the higher than expected revenue performance in 2025-26, gross revenue are projected to fall short of 2025 budget estimates by around 15.7 billion over the next 2 years. Improving tax revenue will require more sustainable economic growth and further gains in tax compliance and administration. Over the medium term, consolidated spending will increase from 2.6 trillion this year to 2.9 trillion in 28-29. Our commitment to support low-income and vulnerable households through education, health, and social protection remains. The lion's share of the consolidated non-interest spending, approximately 61% over the next 3 years, continues to fund the basket of government-provided services and benefits that reduce the cost of living of our citizens. Madam Speaker, this spending is our commitment to the redistribution of income and opportunities in favor of the most vulnerable households in our society. To build on the work of spending reviews, we have got something called targeted responsible savings underway. Honourable members, eliminating waste and inefficiency in government is non-negotiable if we are to maintain public trust that tax money is spent responsibly. The targeted and responsible savings initiative systematically identifies duplication, eliminates waste, reorganize programs to deliver value for money. We are implementing medium-term savings of 6.7 billion by closing or scaling down low priority and underperforming programs immediately. More than half of this involves identifying people who are double dipping and defrauding in the social grant system. We're also scaling down the public transport network grant. The grant has failed to meet the objectives, and some cities have failed entirely to get the projects off the ground. An integrated public transport system is essential to support the working class communities. We will be reconsidering how to lower the cost of mobility and rework the institutional framework. Commuter rail is the backbone of our public transport system. PRASA is making some progress in revitalizing our rail system. 11.8 million passenger trips in 2022-23 to 116 million last year. This is only the start of the broader continuous process to redirect funds from inefficient programs to pressing national priorities. An update will be provided in the February budget. Madam Speaker, let me now turn to the subnational sphere. Allocation to provinces protect frontline services. For municipalities, they ensure continued provision of basic services that include water, refuse removal, sanitation, and electricity. The share of the national raised revenue for provinces and municipalities will respectively increase to 4.24% and 9.7% over the medium term. The allocation, among other things, also cater for changes in population growth and to compensate municipalities for increase in bulk services, service charges related to free basic services. In addition, they also ensure the placing of local government operating capacity on firm grounding. Madam Speaker, we are making steady progress on structural reforms that are a key pillar to our strategy of growing the economy. These structural reforms are crucial to dismantling the binding constraints that have held back our economy. They are also about ensuring that every lever of the state works efficiently and effectively towards the same goal of a stably growing, competitive, and inclusive growth. Through Operation Vulindlela, now in phase 2, since it started in 2021, we are building a tangible momentum across energy, logistics, water, and now critical in local government, spatial integration, and digital transformation. Not long ago, our country was on the brink of energy crisis. Unreliable electricity supply threatened to derail our economy and the transformation of our society. I'm pleased to say that we have avoided that scenario, and instead, we have begun a march towards reliable supply of energy. Load shedding has come down significantly. Through focused and targeted interventions led by Operation Vulindlela, we are transforming the sector. We are building a competitive wholesale market that gives investors certainty. The National Transmission Company has now applied for its market operator license. We are investing in new capacity and alternative sources. More than 2,220 megawatts of solar, wind, and battery projects are in development, with 720 megawatts at advanced stage. Eskom has added 800 megawatts from Kusile Unit 6 and is showing signs of operational and financial improvements. The movement of freight within the country faced serious challenges, resulting in traffic congestion as the transport of goods shifted from rail. This led to an overall decline in the volume of goods and export transited. Reforms in freight logistics are again in gaining speed. 11 private train operators now have slots on 41 routes across 6 corridors. Port efficiency is improving, with vessel waiting time down from 75%, while container handling is faster, with Durban Pier 2 welcoming private operators. We expect to unlock 200 billion in investment over the next 5 years. These much-needed reforms in logistics will increase the volume of rail freight, reduce port congestion, improve the country's economic performance. Water security is a key constraint. We are moving faster to provide legislative certainty, clarity that will stabilize the sector. The Water Service Amendment Bill clarifies institutional rule, while the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency launches in April 2026. We're also ensuring that investment in water infrastructure addresses the problem of maintenance and old infrastructure. To attract skills, investment, and tourism, We have modernized our visa system by clearing 300,000 backlog. These reforms demonstrate we have and are creating space for private sector investment and building infrastructure. Speaker, municipalities are at the forefront of providing essential services. However, many are fraught with capacity constraints that hinder their ability to deal with allocated budgets into reliable services. It is for this reason that several reforms have been introduced to urgently remedy this untenable situation. Let me just give and again highlight a particular example. Minister Sabisa will tell you, as we are allocating the emergency relief for disasters this year, we were also allocating to municipalities that were allocated last year who have not been able to spend last year's allocation. That's the kind of constraint we need to attend to. We are piloting utility reform program to stabilize and professionalize water and electricity businesses in a few municipalities in Mpumalanga. To address persistent underspending and capacity constraints at the local level, we are reforming the municipal infrastructure grant. Where municipalities show persistent failure, delivery will shift to an indirect model through agencies such as like MISA and DBSA, coupled with time-bound capability plans aimed at restoring direct funding. We're seeing encouraging progress in metro trading service reform. Over the 2026 budget, 19.3 billion rand has been reallocated towards this reform in line with council-approved improvement plans. Financial sustainability is improving through better billing, tight credit controls, cost-reflective tariffs with indigent protection and co-funding crowding in concessional and commercial finance. Today, we launch a government's first procurement payment dashboard using data for the basic accounting system. The dashboard is available on the National Treasury e-tender website, showing the payments made to suppliers by most national and provincial government as captured on our payment system. This represents a massive step forward in procurement transparency. The dashboard will identify inefficiencies, anomalies, and uncovering opportunities for consolidation. It also enables analysis of procurement expenditure and the suppliers that do business with state, give citizens, academic and civil society the ability to hold departments accountable, supporting efforts to fight corruption and fraud. Let me just illustrate this point. If you had this system during Tembisa Hospital,
Order, honorable members. Let's allow the minister to make his example. Order.
What the system does.
Order.
If you read this SIU report, what they were doing, they would avoid the tendering system by saying, putting all tenders that are below 500, you are not supposed to tender. You are supposed to ask for 3 quotes. And then people would go on and ask for 3 quotes and split tenders to be under 500. And then this, at the national level or anywhere else, would not be able to track that conduct. What this system does is going to help us to track that conduct and be able to raise flags, red flags at an appropriate time. I know there are some colleagues who says they must abolish tenders. They must first change the constitution before they can do that. We are also waging war.
Minister
on
is proceeding on the next page. I think he's done with his example, so let's allow him to continue. Honorable Minister, you can proceed. Order.
We are also waging war on ghost workers in public service. We have heard calls from political parties and civil society. National Treasury is working closely with the Department of Public Service and Administration and Home Affairs on data-driven approach that integrates systems across the government. We are beginning to see the result of this collaboration. We have already uncovered close to 9,000 high-risk cases that have been flagged for further verification. The early retirement program, which provides financial incentive for employees to exit the public service from October 2025, allows for us to rejuvenate the public service. These interventions will deliver long-term average savings of around 3.5 billion per annum. More importantly, they demonstrate our commitment to fiscal discipline and ensure that every rand spent contributes effectively to growth and service delivery. Madam Speaker, the presentation of the medium-term budget policy statement sends a clear message that South Africa is choosing growth, stability, and reform. It represents our commitment to an open, transparent budget process. It is intended to empower all stakeholders to contribute to the discussion of the nation's priorities. It makes transparent the budget framework through which the government seeks to achieve the nation's social and economic development. We will use our collective efforts to increase the pace and scale of tackling unemployment and building stronger economy. Speaker, as I close, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the President, as usual, and the Deputy President for the Council of their support and for their leadership. Thank you all to the Deputy Ministers of Finance and the excellent National Treasury team led by the Director General. They have walked this path with me, sharing freely the insight, expertise, and passion for our country. Thank you to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services and the Governor for the South African Reserve Bank. Thank you to my cabinet colleagues, the ministers of the Committee on the Budget and the Budget Council from the provinces, who share the heavy load of tough decisions that must be taken in the sustainability of our finances. Thank you as well to what is called the Technical Committee on the Budget, which is composed of a few DGs who have done splendid work. To the Parliamentary Committee of Finance, Appropriation and Public Action, I express my sincere appreciation to all of you. And lastly, Kumamchawe and the family in general for understanding. And to the citizens of this beautiful country, for your faith in us, is our motivation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Order, honorable members. Order. Order. Honorable members. I thank the Honorable Minister. Order. Honorable Minister. You can take your seat so that I thank you properly.
Speaker.
We want to thank you for your presentation, Honorable Minister. I will take note of you, Minister Mackenzie. And the papers tabled by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. And we trust that this spirit shown today will proceed towards February for the tabling of the budget.
Yes.
Honorable Mackenzie.
Honorable Speaker, this is my fence.
Honorable Mackenzie.
They must make a noise.
Honorable Mackenzie. What's the point of order?
The finance minister has proven that we've turned the corner. He just made one mistake.
Honorable.
He didn't thank the government in waiting forever. Waiting forever.
Order, Honorable Minister, that's not the point of order.
But he is a clown minister.
Order, I request members to stand and wait for the presiding officer and the maids to leave the chamber. That concludes the business for the day and the House is adjourned.
Enoch Godongwana, as he lays the framework for the next 3 years in terms of the fiscal framework, of course, they're giving two options, whether to raise taxes or cutting expenditure. We get political reaction now from the DA's finance spokesperson, Dr. Mark Beck. Has the finance minister struck the right chords in terms of consolidating spending as well as ensuring that our debt levels are perfectly sustainable?
I don't know if it's perfectly sustainable, but there are many positive signs coming out of this midterm budget policy statement. We are seeing a consolidation of our debt, and we should be able to maintain it for the first time basically in 15 years below 78%, meaning it won't keep rising. That's important to South Africans because as we spend more on servicing our debt, we're less able to spend on things we need, such as hospitals, schools, and police officers. Likewise, what we've seen here in this budget being announced is an inflation target of 3%, which is a big breakthrough. It's unfortunate that the Reserve Bank, although independent, and Treasury had to be at each other's necks for the last few months, but we are happy to see that this inflation target has been locked in, and that's important to South Africans because it means the cost of living crisis is, to an extent, we're able to contain it. Lastly, something important to point out here is we're embedding the culture of spending reviews, which means with each cycle we need to announce where we found inefficiencies and what we'll do to eliminate those, and just in this cycle alone we've indicated a 6 billion rand plus saving that should materialize over the medium term.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mark Burke, the DA's finance spokesperson. Let me turn to my left now and bring in the ACDP's chief whip, Steve Swart, the finance minister, laying down the finance framework. As the ACDP, what do you think of what is presented today?
Well, the ship is turning in the right direction over the long term. In the medium term, we are still concerned about low economic growth and, of course, that resulting in the debt levels. And whilst my colleague has indicated that the debt levels are stabilizing, it is still very high and 1.2% higher than what was announced in March this year. So the debt service costs are still very high, and what we do need is far greater accelerated economic growth to address jobs and, of course, to address poverty. We are pleased to see that the inflation target has come in and that's been set because that will help in the long term. We're also pleased to see that the programs, expenditure programs, are being looked at and, of course, increased revenue collection. Because as we know, the minister at the beginning of the year said if there isn't increased revenue collection, there'll be a 20 billion rand shortfall in the next financial year, which will mean increases in taxes. The ACDP does not support increases in taxes. Our supporters and the South Africans in general demand value for every rand tax that they've been paying. They haven't received that now, and let us trust going forward that as the ship turns around and proves a fiscal environment, that the tax situation, the fiscal environment will stabilize.
All right, thank you so much, Steve Swart, the chief whip of the ACDP. For more reaction now, we cross to my colleague, Nompu. All right, I'm going to be now the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, for his reaction.
Let's get your thoughts just on the budget. Well, we reject this new inflation targeting because we think that it's going to increase the cost of borrowing. And we know at the center of borrowing is the masses of our people. There's a repetition of what he said at the beginning of the year. There's no clear plan on how we're going to deal with unemployment, how are we going to deal with policing in South Africa, because we've got a serious problem of resources in the police, and how are we going to deal with issues of defense itself. As we're speaking today, everybody's complaining about borders that are pouring. Part of the people who can help us to maintain stability and order in those borders is the army. Our army is not properly funded, and we've seen that when they were in the DRC. This is basically making sure that they outsource that which government is supposed to do. They are making sure that the private sector is at the right position to compete with services that should be provided by the state. In that, you are undermining the state capacity to deal massively with infrastructural development. There's no clear plan on how to increase health and how to deal with issues of unemployment and also the deteriorating infrastructure in South Africa.
If it wasn't for inflation targeting, what would you have preferred?
No, we must sustain what we agreed on earlier. But because the governor of the Reserve Bank unilaterally just makes a decision, and we want to be dancing to the tune of the private sector and so-called foreign investment, we end up changing our inflation targeting because we want to impress the few. That's why the EFF says the Reserve Bank must be nationalized, because it takes decisions that are not based in the interest of the working class in South Africa.
Yeah, giving them all these aspects, however, would say that we're getting more revenue, spending a little bit more as well at this time. Is that helpful to South Africa's economy, as you heard it from the speech?
Well, more revenue means more into their pockets. You know that they steal. The more money we make, the more money we save, the more corruption goes high. No clear strategy on how to deal with corruption, because we can have surplus, we can grow the economy, we can have more revenue, but in the absence of a clear strategy on how you're going to fight corruption, is equal as not having collected more, because it means nothing.
All right, we're going to cut out of that. That is the leader of the EFF. And we bring in more political parties now, as we bring in the leader of Bosa, Musi Maimane. Firstly, as Bosa, do you think the minister is taking us in the right direction in terms of ensuring that there is a fiscal discipline?
It's important that when we talk about fiscal discipline, that we build state capacity. Now, in many ways, we can all stand here and say it's good that we're off the grey listing, but let's never forget that it was the ANC that brought us into grey listing. And so now it's the hard work of all the discipline that's required. It's doing the big things, such as cutting SETAs, cutting agencies, because when you want to make the state more efficient, at this point in time, we've got too many agencies, too many SETAs, and we can't deliver. I want to welcome the minister's announcement about the transparency on digitization of procurement. I think that's important. It will eradicate corruption and citizens can know. It's also important that we focus on a growth agenda that invests in infrastructure. So those are positive initiatives. But ultimately, what I would like to urge is that the challenge that the minister faces is that expenditure directed towards citizens themselves, which is safety and policing. There was no limited mention of that, and I'm concerned that we behave as though we don't have a crime problem in the country, yet that's the biggest issue in our country.
All right, thank you so much, Musi Maimane, the leader of Bosa. For more reaction now on the economic front, Nompu is standing by.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by Brian Molefe. He's from the MK party. Thank you very much, Mr. Molefe. Just give us a sense of your feeling around the delivery of today's midterm budget.
It's quite extraordinary that in the entire medium-term budget policy statement that the minister has just read out, there was no mention of unemployment, which is the single biggest challenge that is confronting South Africa today. One would have expected that there would be measures to deal with the problem. There was not a single mention of poverty. There was not a single mention of inequality. There was not a single mention of the National Development Plan, whose targets are out of kilter and are not going to be met by 2030. There was not even a mention of the medium-term budget, medium-term planning framework that has just been announced to take us to 2030, because quite frankly, I think that we get told these targets, these plans, these grand plans, but nobody follows up on what is happening with them. Nobody updates us, and we actually are now convinced that the government is not, of national unity, is not convinced to dealing with the real issues of poverty, of unemployment, of inequality.
And what were your feelings around the confirmation that 3% is now the new inflation target, with a 1%, basically it's a range of 2 to 4%?
Dealing with inflation is quite important because inflation increases prices and that affects the poor. We agree that we have to deal with inflation. But I wish somebody could deal with unemployment with the same vigor, with the same determination. Because unemployment, tonight there is a family that is going to go to bed without food because there is no food on the table. So inflation for the vast majority of our people is just a big English word. That does not have meaning. People want jobs, people are hungry, people are poor, and there is huge inequality in our country.
Mr. Molive, thank you very much. Let me hand it over now to my colleague Bulelani Philip.
All right, thank you so much once again, Nompu. Of course, we're taking more political reactions right here on the floor. And I bring it now ActionSA Parliamentary Leader Athol Trollip. Of course, coming into this budget, people are complaining about the cost of living, the rising cost of living. Do you think the minister has done enough to alleviate this cost of living for the poor?
No, I don't think so at all. Unemployed people find it very difficult to live. I mean, obviously, we've got high unemployment in this country. It's way too high. It's unsustainable. We don't see enough talk about growth. Sub-Saharan African countries, developing countries are performing much better than we are. Growth is anathema to the ANC government. We just can't see economic growth. Then the minister spoke about revenue. I think revenue collection is really important. We were the party that championed more funding for SARS. SARS has shown that they can collect more, not just from the man in the street who pays tax, but around the illicit economy. I was very pleased to hear the minister talk about the illicit economy because we will never meet revenue targets and we won't have enough money to govern properly as the illicit market and economy grows. And we've seen it growing. He mentioned cigarettes, alcohol, and not only is it illicit, it's also dangerous for people who are consuming illicit products, but it also makes it unprofitable for people trading legitimately. We've seen that. Big South African companies becoming unsustainable because of the illicit economy. So we need to do more about that.
But do we have enough monitoring mechanisms like labor inspectors and inspectors and the like?
So the money that we can save or get more revenue, we can use that money to better fund SARS and the South African Police Services and border management. Because if those three as a triumvirate don't work together, we will never combat the illicit economy. But I want to make one comment about what the minister said about some newfangled dashboard, procurement dashboard that they've launched today. And then he gave us the Tembisa example. He spoke so coherently about what has been happening at Tembisa, which shows that they've known about it for years, splitting up tenders to make them below 500,000. The ANC has been aware of that for years and years and years. But something fundamental has changed in this country. The ANC government no longer has an outright majority. So they need to pull themselves towards themselves. And these are green shoots today of showing that a government that doesn't have an unfettered majority can govern better.
All right, thank you so much, Athol Trollip, the parliamentary leader of ActionSA. For more reaction, we cross back to you, Nompu.
Thanks very much. I'm joined by Xaba Yomzi Nkwankwa. He is from the UDM. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Your thoughts on the midterm budget today?
No, the signs are clearly there that the economy is recovering. I mean, you were looking at growth projections, which we are likely to meet now, and the fact that we have some bit of revenue overruns. We are not too certain, though, whether a proper study was done when it comes to revising the inflation target. Yeah, you can argue for both sides. The impact of reducing the target, for example, on nominal growth and the revenue that the government is going to get on the one hand. On the other hand, the ability, obviously, to reignite growth and for consumption expenditure to increase and all of that. But it would have been nice if a proper study had been conducted. The other thing is, when you're looking at it, for an example, is that the geopolitical tensions when it comes to the tariffs and all of that around the world, they don't seem to have affected the economy yet, but they will affect it at some future point in time. And some provision and planning process needs to be put in place to make sure that we're able to cushion the economy insofar as that is concerned. Fiscal consolidation is welcome, although it's termed differently now. I mean, if you're looking at the primary surplus, that's fiscal consolidation. If you're looking at the expenditure rationalization which has taken place in government, that also too is fiscal consolidation. But to what end? It's great that it helps us to manage debt and to be able to realize some saving when it comes to debt service costs. But we must look at whether it does not erode important social expenditure. That's where we need to be vigilant as parties and to look at whether or not even the expenditure savings that they were talking about when it comes to social grants, why are we only targeting the poor and not targeting the rich and the corruption, white-collar corruption and white-collar crime that's taking place in the country. It's great to see that the additional revenue given to SARS is beginning to pay some dividends, which was given at the beginning of the financial year. Yes, they still need to put more measures in place to try and make sure that they deal with tax fraud, tax avoidance in the country. Maybe once that happens, we are going to be able to realize even more benefits from that strategy.
And very quickly, your thoughts around the reduction of the inflation target. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying the reduction of the inflation target, it depends. That's why we're saying it would have been great if a proper study had been done instead of just a flimsy consultation on the matter, because it's relatively complex. On the one hand, he spoke about its effect, for example, on nominal growth and the effect on revenue, which is short-term but long-term. He also spoke about the ability of that to actually help us with consumption, expenditure and reignite growth, but also the cost of living generally in South Africa is going to help us with that. So it has some spin-offs, it has some pros and cons. It would have been great to have an extensive discussion around this issue so that once the decision is made to locate the inflation target at some level, that comes from an informed position, from a position where all the stakeholders have been extensively engaged on.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, then let's hand it back over now to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Well, joining me now is Zuko Godlimpi, the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, who also heads the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee. Of course, Mr. Godlimpi, firstly, let's start here. As the GNU partners, do you think that you'll be able to all rally behind this budget so that we don't see what we saw earlier this year?
Well, I mean, this is not a new budget, as you know. It's almost like a comment on the earlier budget. The assumptions that went into the initial budget, are they still intact? Are there any macroeconomic indicators that are demonstrating improvements? And what do we think the next budget is going to look like? So if you compare it to what was said in the initial budget, the broad structure of the budget is still pretty much the same. So on those grounds, I think the whole GNU is going to rally behind the budget, because the MTPPS was reaffirming the perspectives that were outlined in the budget that was delivered earlier in the year. So I'm quite confident with that there will be no one who's breaking rank on this one.
But do you think this is a pro-poor budget in terms of making sure that the most basic critical things are catered for by the government, instead of all of this economic speak about economic growth and inflation targeting and the like?
Well, I mean, economic growth is essentially about the poor. It is about providing wider employment opportunities for those who are outside employment. To deal with poverty, we need to create more employment, and that is what the growth agenda has to be substantially about. The Minister of Finance reaffirmed that. When we speak about improvements to PRASA, you lower transportation costs, because once people are now able to use trains as opposed to going to other modes of transport, that deals with the capacity of the poor to not spend higher proportions of their income on transportation. That is about them. The cost of living, every single person you speak to talks about the rapid rise of prices. If you buy bread around the same time last year, you come back now, it has gone up much higher. So when we talk about containing inflation, it is essentially about maintaining a lower cost of living, which then helps with the poor to deal with those. So yes, the economic jargon is sometimes frustrating, but the substance of what the work is about, it is about that. Stabilizing, for instance, Eskom for electricity provision is in the interest of everybody. The discussion is about, yes, you've dealt with load shedding, but what do you do about lowering the cost of electricity? Because that is what also affects poor people.
Lastly and quickly, the review on the tendering system, is it an acknowledgement that the current system as it is, it enables corruption as well as price inflation?
I think there's no one who has ever denied that. No one can deny the fact that the current public procurement system, which is called the tender system, has massive, massive gaps, and those gaps are constantly being exploited by unscrupulous service providers. Like any other system you design, a system is as good as its capacity to give you efficient outcomes and deliver on services. Once there are too many loopholes, you know that there's a standard practice of price inflation, and so you have no choice but to review that system.
All right, thank you so much, Zuko Godlimpi, the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. He also heads the ANC's Transformation Committee. For more reaction, we cross back to Nobu.
All right, thanks very much for that, Bulelani. I'm joined by Vuyo Zungula. He's from the ATN. Mr. Zungula, very quickly, I can see the minister in the corner of my eye. Just give us your quick comment on the midterm budget.
Look, what the minister did today was to repeat the problems that you already know. There's nothing new that came. And what we have a problem with as a party is the fact that he's going to highlight what the problems are but not offer solutions. for example, the issue of illicit trade. It is something that is damaging to the economy because illicit trade affects the health of South African citizens. It also affects how SARS cannot collect proper taxes, but at the same time, he's not availing resources to SARS to capacitate SARS for them to actually fight illicit trade. So what we do not want as the ATM, it is a principle whereby they recite the already known problems. For example, at a local government level, they keep talking about how they are employing consultants to do the work that is to do the work that the people that are employed by the local government should do. But they are not offering any solutions to say how are they going to stop that. And then the last issue, it is the issue of loans. They keep taking loans that will inevitably have to be paid by South African citizens, but there's no real value that we as South African citizens see from the amount of loans that we're taking as a country.
All right, Mr. Zungula, thank you so much for your time there. Mr. Zungula from ATM. Let us take it now back to my colleague, Bolelani Philip.
All right, for more reaction now, we are joined by Imran Musa, who is a member of parliament of the Aljama party, and of course is also part of the government of national unity. Firstly, the framework that has been laid here, nothing new really. Much of the adjustments were expected. As the Aljama party, in terms of the minister's presentation, do you think that has been able to touch the right spot?
Yes, absolutely. Look, as a government of national unity, the retreat did very well in that, they found solutions moving forward. The only way to move the country forward is, ensuring that collectively there's an agreement. And I think the retreat with the president recently has solidified the situation with regards to the GNU and ensuring that there's financial stability. It is difficult under the circumstances. South Africa doesn't have enough funding. We expect that many of the conglomerates, the corporates, to assist government in terms of partnership so that, the fiscal can be improved. I think that's in a nutshell what, as Aljama, we should be looking forward towards, and especially that we're combating the poverty with 62%. I think that's a great step forward.
Pronouncements on infrastructure investment, particularly trying to drive economic growth, do you think it's gone far enough?
Look, it's difficult under the circumstances, we must admit, but look, we've got to keep on trying as best as we can. And as I said earlier, finding solutions, one of the ways and means is to ensure that we have partnerships with private enterprises, conglomerates, corporates, so that we can improve our fiscal.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to bring in Rise Mzansi's leader, Songezo Zibi, who also chairs Scopa. I'm going to come to your forte, which is the issue of making sure that the government's resources are used for the right purposes. Now, if we look at the pronouncements around the issue of the reviewing of the tender system, your reaction to that?
Look, there's more than reviewing the tender system. Of course, there are certain things that within the government procurement space need to be managed better. I'll make an example. Contract management and project management is a huge problem. This is where projects that have fallen behind schedule nonetheless have the suppliers getting paid for poor quality work, even though the work has not actually been done. The government leaks tens, if not hundreds of billions of rands over the medium term in that sphere. It's very important that that gets nipped in the bud. Let me give you a second example where we've got inefficiencies in the system. The Road Accident Fund gets allocated about 50 billion rand per year. 4 or 5 years ago, it was finalizing 253,000 claims with 43 billion rand. It now only does 63,000, still with 43 billion rand. Legal costs are up 70%. That's a value per claim, and legal costs have grown 4 times over. That money needs to go as far as possible. SETAs, it costs the same amount of money to put somebody through a SETA as it does through university. We need to look at that and understand why that is so expensive. So there's a range of work that still has to be done within government to make sure that every rand stretches as far as possible.
All right, thank you so much. Songezo Zibi, the leader of Rise Mzansi. And Nombu, I believe you're standing by with the Finance Minister.
So
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Minister, you've delivered the midterm budget. You've confirmed that indeed you are going ahead with a new inflation target, a lower level, you say for 3%, but with a tolerance level of 1 percentage point on either side. Some people here are arguing that you've done it under pressure. Why now?
I was not under pressure. Let me just say, when I presented my budget vote, I said a lower inflation is good for the economy. That's what I've said throughout the process. In the statement that I issued, I said I cannot make a commitment until I've finalized the consultation process, the president, the cabinet, and all of those people. I've got that political responsibility of making sure that whatever decision I do, I carry the political leadership with me. So that's the issue.
So things seem to be coming along quite nicely in terms of the metrics. You're going to be building up the budget surplus. But some people are arguing that does it make sense to build up a budget surplus buffer when there's still so many things that need to be paid for and taken care of?
The choice you have is not to have a buffer and have escalating debt, right? And escalating debt service cost. Until the day you don't have money to fund that, and you go to the IMF, and the IMF teach you belt tightening. Those are the choice you have, or you do these changes, you cut, you make sure that that thing is going to reduce your debt, is also reduce your debt service cost. Already now we made the point, because we are reducing the debt service cost, we already have got a 4.8 billion rand benefit out of the debt cost reduction.
One of the first things you touched on in your speech was the issue of the fact that we're now off the grey list, but that we can't afford to sit on our laurels. So what work are you and the rest of the stakeholders going to be doing to ensure that we stay off the grey list?
You know, we are working, I'm a member of the security cluster of ministers. Among other things is our focus on organized crime, which will make sure that crime does not pay. You must understand that the two remaining things that made us difficult to come off the grey list were the law enforcement ones. Among other things was to demonstrate effectiveness, that indeed you've got laws, but can you arrest people, can you prosecute them, and all of those things. So within the economic class, I think that's where the challenge is going to be. In money laundering, terrorist financing, we need the security class, and I think we're working very well to achieve to keep on track.
Minister, just elaborate further on what you were saying around positioning African countries in a good way in terms of our representation as a G20 presidency. What benefits is the continent and obviously South Africa going to get from this?
Let me just enumerate a couple of few things. We have managed to have what is called an African engagement agreement, where all the G20 countries are taking shape into it. Beyond South Africa's presidency, there will be this structure of the African engagement. Secondly, we have agreed on a debt declaration, which is a separate thing, unprecedented, where all of us will agree that the issue of debt on the African continent has got to be attended to. Thirdly, we have agreed that this current economic common framework needs to be reviewed, which is also assisting with debt response.
And very lastly, Minister, what lessons have you learned from the budget process this year? Because it was quite messy.
It's quite messy. Quite a few. There's a messy at the level of the government of national unity. I think we've sorted that. The consultation process that has taken place at the level of the government of national unity has been intensive. And as a result, at a government level, we're on the same side. The second part, which can be messy, is the parliamentary process. Because the parliamentary process requires a particular procedure when you amend the budget. None of the political parties, it was the first time people were trying to experiment from a lack of a dominance by one political party. We're going to experiment in amending the budget. And very few people were familiar with the legal procedures for amending the budget. I'm not sure to what extent has Parliament internalized that.
Right, Minister, thank you so much for your time. Go well, sir. All right, that was the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. I'm going to hand it over now to Bulelani Philip.
Well, still a lot of talking points here on the precinct around the political reactions. Joining me now is the Chief Whip of the IFP, Nhlanhla Hadebe. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Quite a lot of talking points. I want to start here. The projections of economic growth by the Finance Minister, always missed year in and year out. Do you think they are realistic when you look at what is announced today?
Our feeling as the IFP is that this medium budget policy statement was a well-considered medium-term budget policy statement, balanced in our view, talks to growth, talks to stability. We feel South Africa is getting there in terms of giving that balance that we've always been looking for. The only thing that we must encourage as the IFP is fiscal discipline. That is the only thing that can take us back as this government. Otherwise, well thought of, well balanced, talks to growth. South Africa needs growth.
So as the GNU partner in this government of national unity, you'll be rallying behind the minister in terms of supporting this mini budget?
Absolutely. We will give him that much needed support as a partner in the government of national unity. We have no other choice. We entered into this government quite aware that there is going to be one or two challenges, but it's work in progress. We are optimistic and we are hopeful that South Africa will get there.
All right, thank you so much, IFP Chief Whip Nhlanhla Hadebe. For more reaction, we cross back to you, Nombo.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined now by the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. You've been sort of the star of the show, really, in the sense that you're under a lot of pressure. You've been given a bit more budget, 7.5 billion rand over the medium term, and you're expected to generate masses of revenue, some extra 50 billion rand per annum. How are you getting on thus far?
Nompu, let me just say it's not easy. It's nice when the minister announces the result, but under the surface, there is an incredible amount of hard work by 14,000 people who I have the privilege to work with. And so just to give you some color, you spoke about the extra money. We have employed, in the first year of this project, we've employed 1,400 additional resources to collect more of the debt that is not generally easier debt, not complex debt. And this year we have increased that to 2,400, about another 900 odd people. But what also is happening is some of the debt that is on our balance sheet is now more complex. So it's not the simple phone call or a little nudge, a friendly letter. We now have to engage more legal instruments like applying for a court, a civil judgment, applying for a writ of execution, where we need to protect a flight of assets to make sure that we have retained assets to cover the debt. So we need more litigation attorneys, we need more legal collectors, more complex, because we've seen an increase in a 35% increase in writ of executions. We see that there are many more taxpayers who want a debt compromise agreement or a debt repayment agreement. That requires more of a skill to be able to understand the balance sheet and an income statement, to look at the affordability. So the level of skill for that debt is harder. We've now brought just over 80 of that cohort of people, and we hope to increase that to 250. So far, our overall debt, including the debt project, have yielded, as at September, has yielded 47 billion. I'm pleased to say that October looks a little bit better, so we are now well over 50 billion. And we hope that every month will gain momentum as there's the learning curve benefit, so that we can get to the commitment we've made to the Minister. But overall, the compliance revenue this year has grown by 14% year on year, and the 18 billion higher than printed estimate that the Minister announced today, half of that is from compliance work.
Excellent work. Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. Let me hand it over now to Bulelani Philip.
Thank you, Nompu. Once again, I'm going to jump straight into it and bring in now Dr. Joe Maswanganyi, who is the chairperson of the Standing Committee of Finance. Firstly, let's start here. The process going forward from after the delivery of this mini budget, how is it going to unfold?
After the Minister has delivered the budget speech, as you have heard, the Speaker has referred all the laws that the Minister, the bills that the Minister has tabled today to the Standing Committee on Finance and the Standing Committee on Appropriations. Friday, the Minister will come for a briefing to brief the joint committees of the NA and the NCOP. From there, next week, the next step, the 4 committees will be briefed by the Parliamentary Budget Office and the FFC. After that, we go for public hearings where the public has to come and make submissions, be it orally or in a written form. After the public hearings, National Treasury and SARS will come and respond to all the issues that the public will have raised. From there, we go back into a committee session, process the report as a result of a public submission, result of the inputs coming from the PBO, FFC, compile a report, adopt it as a committee, submit it to the NA. So the process is strictly 15 days in terms of the law.
We are in unprecedented areas now compared to other years. Normally the mid-term budget policy statement is normally presented in October. Does that not cut your work out for you, given also we are heading towards the festive season and Parliament will be rising, I think, in early December?
Of course, if you remember, the parliamentary schedule was seriously affected by the aborted February budget, where there were issues in the GNU. We are quite happy that there is no drama this time around. Like parties in the GNU are agreeing, which is good for the country. And we have been emphasizing that as Parliament, because Parliament is not GNU. GNU is at the executive level. That parties in the GNU must put the national interest above the party interest. So we are in this situation because of party interest. And I think moving forward, they have learned a lesson that they must be able to meet, like what the President has done a week ago, convene the GNU partners, deal with the politics, develops the terms of reference, develop what they call a clearinghouse. We are quite happy about that if the executive does that, because Parliament is an independent organ of government. We don't want to interfere on how GNU operates, but if they don't operate effectively and efficiently, there's no way that it won't affect Parliament. So we are quite happy that there is concurrence. They are placing the national interest above party politics. And we are going to make sure that as Parliament, we pass the budget in time for the sake of our people to dent poverty and unemployment.
All right, thank you so much. All the best in your work, Dr. Joe Maswanganyi, who is the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance. For more reaction, it's back to you, Nombu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Of course, We've been looking at the midterm budget, and we have to finish it off. We have our resident economist for the day, Martin Ackerman, joining us. He's the chief economist at Citadel, and of course we have Thokozile as well, who we were speaking to earlier. Thank you very much, Martin, for joining us. So one of the things that came out, a key thing, of course, that market players would be looking out at is the economic growth forecast. Slightly reduced for this year, 1.2% as opposed to 1.4%, but the expectation that over the medium term we will grow by 1.8%. What did you understand to be driving these numbers?
Yeah, I think it's crucial because everything that you measure against GDP, the deficit, the debt to GDP, the GDP number is very important. So if we get that wrong, the whole budget is out of whack. So I think it's prudent to reduce this year's number. There's still a lot of hard work that needs to take place, and we are making good progress with the policy reform and the implementation. And therefore, I do think that 1.8, and they actually had a 2% in 2028, that is achievable as long as the government of national unity remains stable and we continue with deep reform. We'll get to those numbers. So I think, the economic numbers are very realistic, and that gives a little bit of hope that the actual other numbers that we're comparing to that is also ballpark right this time around.
And very quickly, what did you think about the inflation target announcement?
Yeah, I think at least now, it's out of the woods. There's been a lot of talks about that, created uncertainty. Now we know what we're dealing with. And I think, maybe not immediately, but longer term, if we lower inflation expectations, if me and you, all our inflation expectations are lower, it actually also means that trade unions are starting with lower inflation increases on salaries. So you baked in lower inflation in the economy, and then as a result of that, you've got structural lower interest rates, which will help all of us. And that is a cost of capital to get investment going into the country. So I think longer term, a step in the right direction, but still a little bit of hard work to get there, but we're moving in that direction.
All right, super. Thank you very much, Martin, for that. And of course, as I mentioned, I'm joined by Thokozile Madonko. She is a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Thokozile, you heard a little bit of the midterm budget speech this afternoon. What are your immediate takeaways with your hat on at looking at inequality?
So I think this medium-term budget policy statement is really asking the majority of South Africans, given our levels of high inequality, to do more with less. And what does that really mean? It means that we're expecting poorer households to deliver and reproduce themselves in ways that are going to be very, very precarious, because what we're seeing is a doubling down on fiscal consolidation or austerity, even though the assumptions being made in the budget is that with this lower inflation target, then the cost of doing government or providing public services will go down. But that's a huge assumption, and it's an assumption that is based on the long term, not the short term. So even National Treasury in the medium-term budget policy statement admits that there's going to be a cost in the short term of this inflation target, and the cost is for poorer South African households. And what is very, very concerning is that this medium-term budget policy statement, neither the speech nor the accompanying document, really talks about one key figure. So we talk about gross domestic product, GDP, but we don't talk about unemployment. And our inequality levels are highly linked to the levels of high unemployment in this country and high levels of youth unemployment in this country. And so when we are concerned about the ability of households to feed themselves, so our research that we've just done globally says 1 in 4 globally go hungry at night, skip a meal. And that is the same in South Africa. We cannot be talking about primary surpluses in a context where people are going hungry and are not able to put food on the table for their families. And so that becomes an important question around our social protection programs. And it's, again, a bit of a red flag that we're not seeing a real concerted effort by the National Treasury or the President to say that we will support a universal basic income grant in South Africa.
All right, Thokozile, thank you so much for that. Thokozile not happy at all about the midterm budget, saying that it really didn't address the major issues in the country, like inequality and high unemployment. And she's worried that this lower inflation target is going to hit the poor. And even though the authorities have admitted that this is the case, they say that this short-term pain is going to be worth it in the long run. But of course, only hindsight will tell us whether that is actually the case. Well, that's all from myself, but I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Well, Nombu, that also brings us to the end of this special broadcast of the 2025 medium-term budget policy statement. Thank you for lending us your ear. My name is Bulelani Philip. On that note, we cross back to you, Unati, in Johannesburg.